Looks like we're ready to go. Welcome everyone to the Plaistow Planning Board meeting, June 7th, 2023. And with that, we will go into a roll call.
Tom Alberti.
Here.
Karen Robinson is excused.
Excused.
Lauren Levin's excused.
Excused.
Chuck Fowler.
Here.
Richard Anthony.
Here.
Kim Moore.
Here.
Bill Coy.
Here.
Jay DeRoche.
Present.
Chen Rowden. And Victoria Healy.
Here.
All right, great. And with that, we'll run right into minutes review and approval. I did want to note that it does show that Jay was present, and I think we've confirmed that he was not present at the last meeting.
Yeah.
It's all
I was
right.
here for that meeting, though.
What's that?
I was here for that meeting.
Were you?
Yeah.
Didn't we just have this conversation?
Yeah.
You messing with me?
No, I was here for that.
All right. So all right. So you were here.
Yeah. Also on
So
the roll call, I was here and not listed.
So Jay was present, even though I thought he wasn't. And then, but we got to reflect Tim. So he's present. Other than that, any other questions about the minutes? With Karen and Lori's absence, should I appoint both Tim and Richard as voting members at this time? Is that appropriate?
It wouldn't be appropriate if that's up,
Okay.
it's up to you.
All right. Before we motion on the minutes, I am going to notate that Richard and Tim Moore are both going to be voting members this evening in lieu of Karen and Laura's absences. Do I have a motion on acceptance of the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
Richard seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion passes 5-0. All right. And from there, we'll jump right back into the Economic Development Master Plan Survey. The goal is really at this point, kind of close the whole loop on everything. We know we've been presented the results. It's been a little bit of time since we presented that, but they're pretty standard. It's things we've been discussing from here on out. And I think the goal here is to say, all right, how do we take the information and come up with some actionable steps? Number one, for our master plan. And also number two, what else do we need to do or we'd like to do to achieve some of the things that came about from the results. So if Jen, you want to pick that up and direct us, that'd be awesome.
So this is basically a presentation of what sort of based on the discussions, the survey, the actual master plan that started all of this kind of led to naturally. I don't want to say that the actions and strategies are the end of the line. You're not done, but they are meant to give you a forward path with what you have built up. So you guys may recall that you did a full master plan in 2020. It's a really good master plan. It looks great. You've got some really good actions in there. You did a lot of outreach. So the vision that you captured, and I'm going to read it verbatim because I think it really ties into the economic development so much, that one of the key parts of it is you wanted a community that balances protecting its natural resources with promoting strong economic development and the expansion of high-quality local and regional job opportunities. That's like the big phrase for the economic development. You have in there having a community that's clean and active, that promotes natural resources, that has good multimodal transportation. You have all of that, but that all supports that economic development piece. So from the survey, I'm not going to rehash what the survey said, but the three big takeaways were people wanted to increase the variety of commercial businesses. So what do you have? Maybe less of some, more of others, the size, the scale, exactly where. Those were part of that conversation, but they wanted more variety. There was a lot of concern about the safety of streets. I think that was largely speaking to Main Street, and a lot of people, based on a separate survey that the RPC did, people generally said we don't really feel safe walking on Main Street. And then also housing really bubbled to the surface, which is why in part we're also doing the housing assessment and grant that we're going to talk about later this evening. But those were the three big takeaways. And after looking through your existing vision, master plan, and actions, a lot of the actions you already have in your master plan support what people are saying. They just don't have that community development, economic development spin on them. So that's what I focused on when drafting the new goals and strategies, in addition to the conversations that we had over the past couple of months. So the first one is really, it's almost verbatim from what came out of the surveys, increase diversity of businesses by encouraging regulations that support, I apologize that got switched in there, that support uses that are desirable to the town. So people wanted more restaurants, people wanted more small retail, people also wanted things that would help to foster more employment opportunities and not just necessarily some of the retail that you do have quite a bit of retail in Plastow. A little more diversity, a little more active types of businesses. So strategies. This is really probably the biggest one for the planning board. Review the uses in the zoning in each district. Make sure they ensure that the desirable uses are even feasible in those areas and are clearly defined. So is it practical to have a restaurant in all parts of town? Is it practical to have a large medical facility in all parts of town? That's what it means. Like, take a deep dive and look, is what we allow, is that what people want? And do our regulations make that feasible? Do we know that we can get small scale medical? Do we know that we can support restaurants, but maybe we don't want drive-throughs? Looking at those sort of nitty gritty little details really can make a difference when a business is coming to town. They honestly want to have the path of least resistance. So if they see right off the bat, no drive-throughs. I know drive-throughs are allowed in parts of Plastow, but if they see no drive-throughs, well, you might not get that Starbucks if that's the desirable business. Okay, well, if they're going to have to fight that, they might not want to come to Plastow. There are some obvious things that can be in your regulations, both by what's defined as allowed uses, prohibited uses, and then extra little nuances that might make certain businesses really difficult. But you might also want to keep those certain instances to make those types of businesses that you find less desirable a little bit harder. So you can't have a car dealership within 1,000 feet of another car dealership. That is a prohibition to a degree, or it makes it harder to have a car sales business. But that's by design. You intended that. That's probably one you want to keep, if not tweak a little bit. So making sure that what you want is what you're allowing and making the most feasible, and also taking into consideration infrastructure availability. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. So that was number one. It really is the planning board, but you should get input from the zoning board and the conservation commission just because of some of the natural resource compatibility. They can serve as that advisory role in that regard.
Jen, can you elaborate a little bit more on getting input from zoning and Concom? Because we certainly have a better line of communication with Concom, but zoning we've sort of talked about that a little bit, that we've tried to open up some channels, but there's a concern that we will cross some boundaries. So what did that look like?
In particular, definitions are things that zoning boards really have strong feelings about. They either want them clearer or they want them more vague, and it can vary. So making sure that when you put in, I'm going to say retail is allowed. Well, what do you mean? Do you mean professional services like a spa or a dentist? Do you mean event space? Do you mean self-storage? Self-storage in some towns is considered retail. You are selling space. Is that what you mean? Does the zoning board know what you mean?
So is your thought that we would potentially introduce some amendments or new language, but before we do that, we would say, hey, we're thinking about changing this language. By the way, ZBA, we're thinking about changing this
I would
language.
try to get zoning board input earlier in the process before you get to public hearings or actual town meeting sort of amendments. Get their input before you get to that stage.
What would that actually look like? I mean, just, procedurally and such. I mean, we're talking when you say input, I mean,
You've
this,
done a variety of ways. You could have a joint meeting. Those are allowed.
okay.
You could form a subcommittee of the planning board to look at it and request a zoning board member to be on it, along with possibly a conservation commission member. You could do it by way of just formal communication of sending it to the zoning board and asking for their input, but they could handle it at a separate meeting or work session amongst themselves. Whether they respond, whether they would want to participate in such a subcommittee or something to that effect is really up to them. They can't be required. Most zoning boards that I've ever had to work with on that kind of process are usually willing to have a conversation, because you're not making them obligated to make a certain decision, but you're trying to get their input based on cases they've seen. They look at zoning differently than the planning board looks at zoning because their role is different. There are things that you can do to tweak definitions and purposes in zoning districts that actually make their job easier. And hopefully actually lead to less people seeking variances because they're clear about what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Yeah,
And
and
the zoning board can help to support that by understanding what the intent was.
And I felt like there was zero communication between our boards, and I get, because we serve roles that come toward you, so almost overlap, but in a sense they overlap, but you have to be careful about where they overlap and so on and so on. So was my intent this year, was to sort of open up those lines of communication in some capacity, but also within the proper and appropriate pathway. So that being said, I think that's a good point by Richard and me, is I think it's appropriate to open up those pathways, because if we're working on a certain goal based on what the town is looking for, then we certainly want the input from other organizations that they agree. And number two, to your point, if they are faced with a variance request, that they have the appropriate language to help enforce or not enforce the variance, or allow or not allow the variance. So
It's much easier to have a conversation about what a zoning definition means or does not mean before you're challenged with a case. Because then it becomes you guys have to be very separate in that regard.
sure. All right, great.
That's that for me to move on?
Yep.
Ensure that design requirements match the vision and goals of the master plan with regard to community vitality, economic development, and natural resources. Design requirements. What do sites have to look like? What's the architecture have to look like? Does the stormwater requirements match the vision? So the actual development of particular sites, both their function, their placement, and their aesthetic, does that match the goals? Some of those goals, and we're going to talk about stormwater later tonight. You want sites that can treat their stormwater to the degree you're both legally required to have them treat it to, but also in ways that don't make detrimental impacts on your natural resources. So that's having site design requirements. They're not the prettiest necessarily, but they have impact on business and economic development. So making sure those align. That's really planning board. The third one, and I heard you sort of mention it, but actually establishing an economic development committee, because I think you as the planning board have really tried to take this on, and it's hard for you to be the economic development committee. They are typically established through select boards, which is why the select board is who is identified in this. But it can also take on more of a function of outreach and promotion of Plaistow to businesses that may want to come to town. And one of the very specific actions I think that economic development committee could serve is to participate in the Salem Chamber of Commerce. I know that ball has started rolling, but that is something a committee such as that could take on. The select board is pretty busy, I suspect. The planning board is busy. So having a committee that is really dedicated to economic development, they can have the role of business promotion that most other boards in town aren't able to have because of their function and, quite frankly, how much they have on their plate.
That's no, I think that's great because we've talked about that, right? Now we're a member of the Greater Salem Chamber of Commerce, but we haven't done anything officially with that. And frankly, I said, listen, I'd love to do that, but kind of taxed with other commitments. So within that scope, how do we establish this economic development committee?
It would have to be done by the select board, usually typically through a vote, and then they can establish their purpose and their membership.
Okay.
Typically, you'd want to have that be a diverse part of the town, some board members, some citizens that would participate, hopefully a business owner in town or two to be participants.
Sounds like Jay wants to be on that board, so that new committee. So he's, it's here anyways. So
My recommendation to immediately start that is to get it to be an agenda item on a select board meeting.
Okay.
That's a really low-hanging fruit to start it, and
what's the feedback from the select board members that are here? What are your thoughts? Do you have any concerns, or does it seem like, because I'm sure that every single department or committee that already exists within Plaistow talks about some aspect of economic development or business related stuff. So, but we don't seem to have a singular focus by any one group that is trying to direct where we go and what we want to try to do.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. It'll be a good idea. The main thing is getting volunteers, right?
Yeah.
That's the hardest part of anything.
The same 20 are doing the same, are on the same all the other committees anyway, same 20 people that volunteer in town.
it might be a place where you have someone that's perhaps a member of the Salem Chamber of Commerce or Pace.
Yeah, Pace.
That is a resident here in Plaistow, owns a business in Plaistow ideally, and would want to be part. Like, there's probably a different pool of people than you normally pull from that may be interested.
Okay.
A lot of economic development committees, and so you'd want to establish like what their purpose is, what are they really charged with. Ones that are more successful tend to really be with that education, outreach, promotion, like getting things on the town website, being part of the chamber, having events, trying to help connect the different activities in town and serving as that conduit, then also trying to do everything, because the planning board should look at its zoning. That's a planning board charge, but it doesn't have to be the economic development committee's charge. Just they should be aware of it, and both boards could be communicating with each other.
Is there an example of an economic development committee, like a local town or something like that, that's relatively?
Brentwood has a pretty successful economic
Brentwood?
development committee. He's a select board member there. John Morgan has been really successful at trying to get things going and having a collective vision for economic development in Brentwood. It's only maybe 2 years old, so they haven't existed for a long, long time, but they've got really good momentum. Brentwood just had a planning charrette to look at evaluating their recreation facility as a potential economic driver for their town, to help have that be a central community asset to help pull in more businesses and more people wanting to come to Brentwood. That was one of the outcomes of their economic development committee.
Bill and Jay, if we propose this for the select board discussion, would you ask that someone come from our team, our board, and present anything? And what's?
I think that would be good, because you'd probably want somebody from this board on that, I would think.
Okay.
Because bylaws would have to be done, things like that.
Sure.
And then you, from there, figure out, do you want, someone from the select board to be on there as well as a member, and then members from the community, and how many?
Yeah. No, to Jen's point, I think that we've all been tasked with other primary functions, but they all overlap in some capacity. So if we had a PACE member, and if we could then get Greater Salem Chamber of Commerce, and they drove that because they have a more focused goals through that. But all right, no, that sounds Sounds like an important piece.
I will say, if you have a committee, have your recreation committee be part of it. There's usually really good ties in recreation.
That sounds like up Bill's alley. He's a lifer on that. Are you still on that, Bill?
An alternate on there.
There you go.
I've slowly kind of slid away.
All right, rec committee, select board, and planning board, and others. Okay, perfect.
All right. We good to keep going?
Thank you.
The next one is really about infrastructure. Ensure that appropriate infrastructure, and by that I do mean roadways, water, energy, broadband, is available, safe, and is maintained to support business. If you don't have the infrastructure, you're not going to have the businesses, or they're not going to stay for long. Strategies are identifying where the infrastructure is and where is it nearby to determine if it can support the kinds of uses that you want to have in that area. You don't need a wastewater treatment system to support agriculture typically, but you might need it to have some more density of mixed use, of more impactful types of retail or really larger restaurant density. So there are things you might be able to have some of without some infrastructure. I'm just going to use wastewater because you don't have any sewage treatment. You have all on-site septic in Plaistow. It's a really big expense to bring wastewater to a municipality. So do you want to eventually plan to allow uses that would require wastewater, or do you want to see what you can do with the existing infrastructure because that's what's there now? What can it support? That can in part be done with the planning board. The select board typically needs to be involved because if you're doing any sort of infrastructure considerations, there are things that trickle down through a select board. I will say as part of the housing grant that we're going to be working on, we're going to be doing a build out analysis, and we will get into that, but that does include an infrastructure evaluation. What infrastructure do you have where? Where do you have water lines? What kind of soils do you have, and how much can they deal with septic capacity and density? What's your zoning currently? Where are the waterways and the wetlands? So some of the infrastructure already gets built in. You do have broadband in Plaistow. I suspect it's 100% coverage in Plaistow, but there might be pockets where you don't have good cell service. Well, maybe you need that too. So it's really making sure that what you want, you can support, and if you can't support what you want, how do you get the things that can support what you want? Number 2 is, I think, very much a hot topic right now of coordinating with DOT on some of the Main Street improvements. You just had a meeting, or you're about to have a meeting about that?
Monday.
You had it this past Monday. Okay. To make sure that some of those changes actually are compatible with some of the smaller scale commercial and retail uses that you seem to desire in that area. That kind of goes with the people not necessarily feeling safe, and if they don't feel safe, they're not going to come to the businesses. So making sure that circle keeps happening. That's really a select board function because of how they deal with DOT, but the planning board can be involved in those discussions. Number 3 is evaluating the cost of maintaining town-owned infrastructure. So your town-owned roads, the water systems to a degree, to identify if you need funding. And that would really come through your CIP program. Are you actually maintaining the roads and the sidewalks that you have to support those businesses? If you're not even maintaining what you have, you're probably not going to expand them. So making sure that that's part of the town planning process. Newmarket is another good town that has a good economic development committee. Just as an example, about 15 years ago, Newmarket redid all of its sidewalks. They put in better crosswalks in downtown Newmarket, which they have 108 is their main street. So they have a state road that serves as their main street too. Really did a good revitalization of downtown Newmarket. So as a similar scale town, that's probably a really good example for you guys to sort of take a look at.
Not to go too far down that, but in terms of like sidewalk improvements, I mean, were those state roads, or is this town assets that are having sidewalks developed.
So that's the funny, tricky part with sidewalks.
Yeah.
The state will help you to put the sidewalks in, but you have to plow them. The town has to be willing to plow them. If you're not willing to do that, so that's sort of both installation and maintenance, then you're not going to have the sidewalks. But sidewalks certainly could go on other town roads. You might not want them everywhere. Most towns don't want them everywhere. But it is a cost.
Mhm.
So it's evaluating how far do you want those sidewalks to go possibly, or what are they connecting? The last is to, when considering infrastructure improvements, ensure that the improvements improve safety for people and natural resources. So this is when you are widening a road, putting in some possibly rain gardens to improve the function of the town, making sure that those actually are a benefit for either people, sidewalks, bike lanes, cleaner water, or you're dealing with stormwater infrastructure, that is improving both aesthetics and natural resources. That, again, goes to supporting the businesses, because if they know that they have a clean, good-looking downtown that's not flooding, that also they can promote like, hey, we're a green city, green town. That also helps with community vitality, which helps with economic development. It's really a community development scheme, but that plays into economic development. And that's to come back to that. People really like protecting the natural resources here in Plaistow. Of all of the surveys, and it's reflected very strongly in your master plan, protecting the natural resources in Plaistow and largely water were a really, really big concern. All right. Folks, good for me to keep going?
Any other questions? Nope. Go ahead.
The last one is really to strive for a diverse housing supply that meets the needs of residents. And we're going to do more on housing outreach with some of the other housing stuff, but also meets the need of employers in Plaistow. So one of the big economic development things was the concern about housing. And one of your vision ideas is that you want to be able to promote local and regional job creation. Now, if people have no place to live, that's really hard to do. So tying housing into economic development, the surveys that come out of the state of like, what's the biggest hindrance to your business growing? Usually in the top 3 is, I can't find anybody to work for me because they can't afford to live here. So housing has a really strong tie in economic development. Now, not everybody that works in Plaistow will live in Plaistow. That's obviously reality. But given your proximity to Massachusetts, you have a really good, probably higher than average potential of that being the case for a lot of folks. So strategies. Identify opportunities within local regulations to promote diverse housing types that are compatible with business uses. So you have done some of that with some of your increased allowance of mixed use. There are probably some further deep dives we can do, not necessarily businesses and housing on the same lot, but ones that can coexist in the same area.
I was reading something that was basically saying, you can read anything you want, right? The internet. It was basically saying that there's a reckoning coming from commercial housing, commercial properties. And that makes sense, right? Because more people work from home after COVID and so on. New York City has anywhere from 50, some buildings 50 to 30% occupied. And here I am thinking like, well, we've got a huge housing issue. We've got going to have tons of commercial space. Why don't we let people live in these commercial buildings in some capacity?
So
how that ties into Plaistow, I don't know, but that was just a side story. But
some what are formerly non-residential sites are more easily transformed into residential uses than others. I'm going to say the Bed Bath & Beyond store doesn't get converted into apartments very easily. It's not designed to be that kind of a building. But usually smaller scale buildings are more easily convertible, I should say, into small scale residential or mixed use at minimum.
Whereas we have an overlay district that sort of allows for a mixture, we don't necessarily have the possibility of really taking a commercially zoned building and just completely making it residential
You could do that through some of your site plan change of use regulations. It's unusual to go that way. Usually it's the other way around.
Yeah.
But it is feasible through your regulations. Just because it's feasible doesn't mean it's really clear to the average person who may want to do it, especially with a smaller building.
Yeah.
This is one that if you do the Economic Development Committee, have a discussion with them because it can be coordinated as far as like what local regulations, what housing types best fit with what types of businesses. So, having the store below and the apartments above, that's a pretty classic mixed use, but, you don't necessarily want to put a doggy daycare right next to a whole bunch of senior housing. That kind of mix may not work. So thinking about what uses you allow and what you don't, or having a trucking company right next to an apartment building. The beeping will probably drive the residents crazy, and they'll call the select board, and that may not be ideal. So what's compatible? Number 2 is to continue to ensure that housing development standards incorporate the characteristics and atmosphere that Plaistow prioritizes. So that is both protection of natural resources and some of the aesthetic characteristics of historical preservation, stone wall preservation, some of the buffering, plantings. So making sure that they're compatible with where they are in town. That's a little vague because different parts of town have different characteristics and what people have expectations for. 125 is clearly different than Main Street, which is different than some of the areas that you get a little more rural towards Newton. And then number 3 is utilizing the findings of the housing needs assessment, which we're going to get into in a minute, which are expected later, probably finish around this time next year, to better understand the types of housing that residents need and that businesses are actually seeking for their employees, or the housing types of the residents that are really going to support those businesses. If you have, I'm going to say, a lot of lower income housing, that might not be able to serve only high-end retail or services. But if you have mixed and a variety of restaurants, well, that can probably be supported by a variety of income levels. So making sure that there's not such a chasm between the residents and then the businesses, that the residents can't help to support the businesses, and vice versa. Plaistow is not probably known as the biggest tourist town, so you're not necessarily getting that influx of, I'll say, tons of outside money coming in to support some, especially some of your smaller Main Street sort of areas. The residents are the main ones supporting those businesses. But that is a good conversation to have with an economic development committee and to bring that into the fold.
I'd assume that a Wegmans or, other high-end, sort of higher-end retail, grocery type place looks at sort of the monetary incomes of communities before they go in, right?
They absolutely do.
Because, when people say, what do you want to see? Or people are like, Wegmans. I'm like, I ain't coming there.
There's a lot of folks in many towns that will say, I want a Whole Foods, I want a Trader Joe's, but then they get a dollar store. Well, those companies aren't going into markets where they can't make money. That's their entire intent.
Target market, yeah.
So really the last one is primarily planning board. These are almost all planning board because they really are housing stuff that you're going to tackle in the next year. So these might need to get added to, but for now, because we're going to do a deeper dive, these seem like the high level ones too. And all of these can fit under your existing implementation plan as economic development. They are worded differently enough that it didn't make sense to just tie them into the existing ones. I did consider that. But basically having a new area, you have natural resources, you have transportation, you have land use, having the next section be economic development. So just amending that table.
So that's your recommendation for the master plan, add a whole section, economic development, and then incorporate some of this and what we look to do within these sort of questions or these strategies, and put that in there. Okay.
I will say I didn't add I probably could have added more specificity, but knowing how you guys have implemented your master plan, it seemed like if I came in at you with 27 different strategies, a lot of them would get lost in the weeds, which is a pretty common thing for most towns. So sticking with 9 kind of seemed to be the right number for you guys.
Yeah, it does need to be manageable. Okay. All right, great. Some of these could probably get answered by an economic development committee. Some could be answered by us, such as uses and zoning. Some can't be answered quite yet because we haven't finished the housing
Correct.
needs assessment. So, but we could have sort of a placeholder for that.
Yep.
Great. Any input from anybody? Questions?
So as far as next steps, if the board is happy, I'm happy to put this out so it'll fit the same format as your implementation table. I actually don't have that in a format that I can manipulate, but I'll create like a new full implementation table that has all of your existing strategies and then these added on with an economic development section. You would have to actually amend your master plan. You do have to have a public hearing. So that would have to get noticed. But that can be taken care of any time of year. And it's kind of a lull of any zoning type changes. So
The source for the master plan was done in InDesign.
if you guys have those files, then I can just amend that table.
I believe we do.
Okay, I can ask Dee about that.
Yeah.
I only have it as a PDF, so.
Is that something you'll be able to ask Dee about? Okay. InDesign, is that what you called it, Tim?
Yeah, I think it's Adobe.
It is. We use InDesign at the RPC office. I just don't have the original file. So.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that'd be great. All right. So I will send something to Bill and Jay or to the select board about the economic development committee. And then I can offer my services or offer to come to the meeting and talk about it. I think that sounds appropriate.
Yeah, just let us know what date works for you.
Can I recommend that you might want to wait until you officially adopt this before you put it on the select board meeting? I mean, you could coordinate the dates, but just so you can be like, we just adopted this as like a catalyst for why you're putting it on that agenda.
And then I think that within that, right, so we get the master plan updated as such. The major thing that I think that we can do from here, and frankly, it's going to come quickly, to the fourth quarter when we get into the review of zoning amendments, possible zoning amendments to propose, is spend some time on looking at uses and see how that aligns and have discussions about language and direction and okay, if we don't want this type of a business, what can we actually legally do in terms of uses and definitions and so on? Or if we want to promote this type of business, how can we make an amendment to our current language to promote that sort of thing? So I think we would look for guidance, obviously from Tim through experience, but also RPC support in that sense. Does that make sense to the board? Right? Sounds like that's probably the number one thing that we can actually physically implement ourselves is zoning amendments.
I would recommend that discussion start sooner rather than later because it will become September and November when it's zoning season and hearing season very quickly. And those are usually discussions that merit and warrant having time.
Yeah, we won't have our July workshop meeting unless, do you guys want to have it?
That's what, the day before the 4th? I know where I'll be.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so we know that that's not going to happen. And then, to your point, then there's August. There's only 2 or 3 meetings before we're really into it. So I think that's going to be the number one focus for the remaining workshop meetings for us.
Well, I mean, the other thing we need to do in July, I think, is look ahead for next year to see we're gonna be working on housing and blah, blah, blah. Is there something, else that we need to put in our budget? Because budget season is coming up, probably starting in August. I don't know, every year they seem to start a little earlier. Make sure we have time.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a huge budget on the master plan implementation because it was done pretty recently, but we may want to increase that, look at increasing that if it's required. May not be. It sounds like internally we can, and through the RPC's assistance, we can get what we need to do.
I will say that our regular circuit rider contract, and to some degree the housing grant, helping define districts, pulling in examples of definitions for certain uses, that can fall under the circuit rider contract. Getting into like a lot bigger like zoning map changes and that typically triggers a need for an additional contract.
Okay.
So
Yeah. All right. Good. Well, that's a good point. I think we need to understand exactly what our budget is through the RPC, what it covers, what it doesn't. If we think we need more support, does the budget cover that or not? Okay.
I will say offhand, it doesn't really seem like you need a zoning district full change. Like, where are your boundaries? It really seems like it's a definition and sort of like, what's the intent of this district definition? So I think it's more words, less maps,
Yeah.
to be frank.
I think I agree, right? Do you agree?
Yeah, I don't think I don't see any zoning map changes. But, I mean, we have a contract with the CAI. They usually do that. Work for us. I'm not so concerned about the mapping, but just the want to make sure we have money enough to do what we want to do. Like the economic development chapter. I don't think that's a big effort, but there's some effort involved that's above and beyond the circuit rider. So
there is some money in that budget line. I don't think we utilized it last year, but I think we have some for this year, and whether it goes to the company that did the original one or if we enlist the RPC to do it, I think. But I think that's a Mr. Colby kind of thing, right? Yeah.
The budget, see what you want.
Yeah. All right. No, that's a good point, Tim. So I appreciate it. Certainly, if you have any input on that front, I know you've been here for years. So, and Jen, if you see anything that you think we're going to ask you for, but doesn't appear to be covered, please let us know. And
I don't offhand know like sort of
Jen and Victoria.
your normal line items and stuff, but we can certainly, if you're thinking of something, we do quotes for towns all the time of
Okay.
what we think the cost might be if it's above and beyond an existing contract.
Okay. Great. Does that bring us to a close
It does.
on that section?
All right, so we're planning to do basically what is 2 housing discussions tonight, but one is a review of the regional housing needs assessment that we did for the region
Okay.
and a few Plaistow things. And then Victoria's going to talk about the housing grant that you guys received back in February that we haven't started working with you, although we've been starting some background work on it so that we can hit the ground running. We need to get through the economic development aspects first. So this is really meant to set the stage for some of the housing discussions that you guys are gonna have to have because you've decided to apply for a grant and you got awarded the grant. So RPC did a regional housing needs assessment. There was also a state housing needs assessment that was just released. Ours came out in March. Is the project website. It is a very thick document. There are 94 different parameters that we looked at for data, multiplied out by all 27 towns that we cover. Most of them hit different data points over time of at least 3 different years. So typically 2000, 2010, 2020, because a lot of it's census. So there's a lot of data. I'm going to try and boil down the major parts of this and go through it kind of quickly because you can get caught in the weeds with this really, really easily. If you have a question, stop me. I'll explain it more, but I'm going to try and keep it fairly fast-paced. So housing is a topic everywhere. It is an issue everywhere, globally, nationally, state level, regionally, town level at Plaistow. You are not alone. It is happening everywhere. There's basically just a worldwide housing supply, and housing that exists is largely really, really expensive. History of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. So this was done by every planning commission in the region to fulfill a statutory requirement of the regional planning commissions. It was funded through some COVID money that the state got. Another component of this that was done as part of the regional housing needs assessment is to help towns determine whether they are in compliance with the state's workforce housing statute that was adopted in 2008. A component of that statute, and I will get into the specificity of it, is that every town in New Hampshire has to provide reasonable and realistic opportunities to build workforce housing. What that typically means is housing that is affordable to people like firefighters, teachers, nurses, retail workers. It is not necessarily low-income housing. The statute does state that the planning commissions are supposed to do a housing needs assessment every 5 years. Because we do not get funding from the state to actually do those, we typically do it more about every 8 years. So our last one was done in 2015 with part of our regional master plan update. We don't anticipate being able to update it again in 5 years. I will caution one other thing. This is an advisory document. You are not beholden to use it, although we will use it for some of the housing stuff that we're doing because it is a good data assessment. It is advisory only. We put it out there because we want our towns to have better information to use when they're doing things like master plan chapters, zoning ordinance considerations, etc. So different factors that are impacting housing regionally are the increase in population, the age of our population because we are getting older, the fact that we have built less houses more recently than in previous decades, the cost of housing, employment trends and people that are moving into New Hampshire, the current housing stock not necessarily meeting the needs of the communities, and the fact that income has lagged behind housing prices. Real quick, the regional population has increased by almost 12% in the past 20 years. So we've increased a lot. Plaistow isn't unique in increasing by a lot. You're not an outlier. Your population has increased.
Jen, how much is sort of second home ownership with the intent of VRBOing and so on, and then also these investors that are buying up these properties and doing that?
So short-term rentals certainly have an impact on housing. We do have statistics in the housing needs assessment on how many short-term rentals are in every community. Offhand, Plaistow doesn't have a ton of them. It typically tends to be more tourist towns that get hit harder. They certainly do impact housing stock, but there's also an argument that having the short-term rental in an accessory dwelling can also provide income for people to be able to stay in their homes. So it's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but it does affect housing stock. There is also the idea of corporations coming in. Zillow got dinged a couple of months ago for going in, buying a lot of housing stock, and basically causing the prices of housing to go up because there was such little stock. Housing production has slowed. So this chart, the main thing to look at is that this number, let's see. Back in 2003 was about our peak building in the region. Then we had the Great Recession, and it crashed around 2008. We have not recovered to the pre-recession numbers as far as how many building permits we were giving for residential building. We have not recovered, and then COVID hit, and then that crashed again. It is up since 2021, but it has not increased since pre-pandemic levels. Age of structure. The reason that I always put this in, and people sort of look at me funny, like, why does it matter how old our housing stock is? About half of the housing stock in this region could qualify as a historic resource. The basic threshold for a historic structure is it has to be over 50 years old. About half our housing stock is over 50 years old. So we're relying on a lot of old houses. And you can also sort of see in the past 2 decades how little of the housing stock we've actually built. It's less than a fifth. And yet our population has increased by almost 12% in that time frame. So housing production has slowed. These are the number of units of owner-occupied housing units since 2010 for the region. Went from about 58 to about 62 over a 10-year period. Our population increased by more than 20,000. Yet our housing stock only increased by about 4,000. The other thing to notice is this renter-occupied. Vacancy rates play a really big role in housing stock. Most people in the region actually own their homes. They don't rent. A healthy renter market is considered to have 5% vacancy rate. It is actually even less than this 0.6 now. It's about 0.4 is the latest numbers coming out of New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. It's really, really...
You're saying for rental properties,
For rental properties. These are the numbers that are available at any given time, at any price point. So there's even less availability for the lower income scale.
That means if anybody's got college age kids or around there, we're all just getting ready for them to move back in.
That is part of the housing discussion. Our population is aging. The average age in the RPC region was 43 in 2010. In 2020, it was 47. Plaistow is somewhere in the middle as far as age. You are not one of our younger towns. You are not one of our older towns. Rye and Newcastle get that designation. Their average age is over 50. So your average age is 44.2 as of the 2020 census. The cost of housing has increased for everybody. Between 2010 and 2022, the typical rent went up by about 50%. The typical median home went up by about 100% over that same time period. Our incomes have not kept up with our housing costs. So the dark blue is New Hampshire. These are housing costs. For the housing costs in the United States since 2000 through 2022. And this is income. Dark blue is New Hampshire, light blue is the United States. You can see that it has gone up as far as income, but not to the degree that housing costs have gone up. And not with the same peaks and valleys. So who is moving to New Hampshire? We are in the state, the fourth highest in migration. So people moving from out of state into New Hampshire, we have the fourth highest rate in the country. Only predicated by Idaho, North Carolina, and Maine. So a lot of people want to come to New Hampshire, which is a great thing. We all live here for a reason. They're primarily coming from Massachusetts if they are coming from out of state. So 71% of people in New Hampshire, that were buying homes in New Hampshire were from New Hampshire. About 16% were from Massachusetts, and 13% were from other states. Those were largely California, Colorado, and to a degree, Texas. They all had a couple of percentage points, and then the rest came from all over. My general theory, and I can't actually prove this, is that folks are coming from California and Colorado because we have a very similar lifestyle out here between the oceans and the mountains and the recreational capacity and also nature. And we also have some of the proximity to more urban areas that folks from those areas are.
Well, there's probably two big things that drive that. State tax.
There is also the New Hampshire advantage.
That's part of it. And then the other big part is a lot more people are working remote.
That is also true. And I will say we are not typically in drought. We tend to have less natural hazards that happen despite all of the smoke that we have outside today. So there's a lot of reasons, but we are seeing that shift over time. So back in 2016, only 10% of the people that were buying homes in New Hampshire were from out of state. Now we're up at 13. That's continued to go up over time. So going back to the vacancy rate and the fact that the housing stock doesn't meet the needs of our communities, months to absorb is a way of describing how many homes are on the market for sale. How long, if no new homes came on the market, would it take for the current number of homes for sale to be sold? It's considered to be a healthy market if it's a 6-month inventory. So you have 6 months worth of homes that are available to be bought at that current pace. In the early part of 2022, we had less than a week's worth of housing stock. So if no other houses came on the market, they would have all been gone in a week. Doesn't matter the price point. The other thing is getting back to that rental occupancy rate, that 0.6. The healthy market is about 5%. And again, that's all price points. When we talk about affordability, the basic HUD standard is that if you were spending more than 30% of your income on, so if you're a renter, on rent and utilities, so think of your own income. If you rent, are you spending more than 30% of that on your rents? If you own your home, are you spending more than 30% on a monthly basis on your mortgage, your property taxes, your insurance, and your utilities? If you are spending more than 30%, you are considered cost burdened. Your housing costs more than HUD considers affordable. It's too much of your income going towards housing. So for renters, about 42% in our region spend more than 30% of their incomes on housing. For homeowners, it's a lot less. About 26% spend more than 30% of their income on housing. The homeownership cost, part of the reason for that discrepancy is people build equity in their homes. So if they've lived in their home for a long time or it's increased in value, for the amount that they may be spending on a monthly basis because they paid down their mortgage or they own their home outright may be a lot different with their actual income. Okay, this gets into the part that people really don't like to hear from me because this gets to the state requirement that you have reasonable and realistic opportunities for development of workforce housing. Part of that is that the law prescribes that if you are meeting, it's called your proportionate regional fair share of housing that is considered affordable, it meets certain costs, and that can be either because that's how much the rent is going for or the house costs, it's market rate, or you have housing that has income restrictions. So like you build some housing and you can't charge more than X amount of dollars for the rent if it has a legal mechanism to restrict the amount you can either sell it for or rent it for. So the housing needs in the RPC region are about 14,563 housing units are projected to be needed by 2040 across all 27 towns. For perspective, between 2000 and 2022, we built 12,656 housing units. So if you lived here in 2000, think of how much housing we have now. Well, we have to build a little bit more than that in the next 17 years. The projections that were done not just to account for population increase. They were also done by looking at labor market, looking at the split between what has traditionally been the amount of renters and owners and the availability of housing stock, but also looking to get back at a more, it's called a balanced market. So getting to that 5% vacancy rate, getting to that availability that the housing stock will still allow for there to be a certain amount of turnover of owner-occupied housing units. So we projected out, and I don't expect you to be able to read this. If you do go and look at the housing needs assessment, the number of units that are needed overall in a given town by 5-year increments. So we've got 2025, 2030, 2035, and 2040. That is split between affordable units and just what I'll say unaffordable units, and then further refined by renter versus owner. But housing is more than just a number. This analysis, which was not done by the planning commissions, it was done by a consultant that the state hired, treats every town as being the same. It doesn't look at infrastructure. It does look at how many houses you currently have, and it does look at population, but it just presumes that there are no other constraints. There's no constraints of wetlands. There's no constraints of floodplains. There's no constraints of other boundaries and conservation land. It just assumes everybody is the same. So some places some of these housing units are more realistic than others. Because of that, we did do an analysis of other barriers and opportunities for where housing might be better suited. It was meant to be a very high-level analysis, and the basic thing to notice is that where there's red, those are places that housing actually can't be built. It's conservation land. There are legal restrictions. You can't build it there. Where you're seeing areas that are green, those are areas that have a higher possibility of building housing because they are closer to transportation, they are closer to water and or sewer. They have more infrastructure physically there capable of being built on. This is just a high-level thing. It has just helped in our region to identify where are better opportunities, what towns might be better suited in certain areas than others. Plaistow has some areas of green because you do have major transportation corridors through Plaistow. You have some infrastructure, or you're in the midst of getting some infrastructure.
Do we have the land?
You know, we did look at where is the built area already too. So there is some area of Plaistow that has the opportunity to have more housing. There just is. The build-out analysis that we're going to do under the housing grant will help to refine basically this map for Plaistow and look at your zoning and look at a few scenarios about what zoning tweaks you could make and how that might result in shifts of build-out of where you could put houses.
Just before you go into any type of granularity, these background assumptions that are being used that are coming, either from the state, or I would assume, are there any federal considerations that are being pushed to the state to in terms of what constitutes zoning changes and things like that they might want to see? I mean, okay. Well, there you go.
The simple answer is no. There is nothing coming down through the federal government, through New Hampshire, that will trickle into your zoning. There is the state law, though, that does state that you have to provide reasonable and realistic opportunities for affordable housing.
Like, for instance, I mean, we don't have, let's say, multi-story, multi-family type arrangements, all right, that you traditionally see maybe in the center of like larger municipalities and things like that. Is there contemplation of like forcing or sort of pushing municipalities to that type of logic?
At the state level, there have certainly been a number of bills that have been introduced, most notably the accessory dwelling law that was passed back in 2017 that did require any town that allowed a single-family zone to allow accessory dwellings, provided there was adequate water and wastewater facilities. So yes, that did come down from the state. There have been bills that have been put forth to require that all towns allow up to 4 housing units if they have water and sewer on a lot. There have been attempts. The only real big one of note is the accessory dwelling unit one, of which, there are parameters that fit around that as well. You have an accessory dwelling ordinance. I believe you had it before 2017, if I can recall that correctly.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
it was probably a little different, but
it was originally called the in-law apartment, so that kind of got converted to ADUs. We do allow them by right in any residential zone on single family. We don't allow them on, I don't think we say anything about duplexes, which we might want to reconsider.
I'd have to go
But certainly
look at
multifamily, they're not allowed. So,
So the question you just asked is a pretty common question that I think this is my 8th time giving this presentation. It's a very valid concern. Our goal through having the data at the RPC level, but also working with you, is to give you better information to make decisions about what you want in your community.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that by adjusting the model, like where you say the model projects you need this much housing over a period of time, is there sort of a pressure that's being put on to like, oh, well, our zoning doesn't accommodate that, it doesn't accommodate that, and then at some point does someone say that, well, technically now you don't have your fair share of workforce housing, so now you need to modify to accommodate for that?
There are some folks who want to take this housing needs projection and be able to use it with municipalities as if you were to deny a large scale, I'll say, apartment complex that may want to use the housing needs assessment projections to get at that. If you can make an argument in your own policies and regulations that show why you made the decisions, and I don't want to say you could just disallow apartments, that can justify your decisions on certain sites or certain types of projects, someone might try to come after you based on the numbers in that projection, but they'll have a harder time being successful if you have grounding in why you made the decisions you made.
I'm reading that more and more states are doing what we were talking about, which is at the state level saying we're gonna override local zoning and enforce that they do this, and be damned, they can't do anything about it because their zoning is too restrictive and is not promoting the creation of affordable housing. Within that, so I assume some other types of states are probably going to be more forceful on that than ours, but who knows? With that in mind, what's the standard for what is quote unquote affordable housing? And I think that Plaistow's in pretty good shape with that, right?
So Plaistow is in the Portsmouth, Rochester area.
really?
So HUD has different areas, and they're not quite. I'm sorry, you're in the Plaistow Salem area.
I think,
That's what HUD standard you're in.
yeah, in the,
The affordability threshold if you were to create affordable housing, the maximum sale price is $448,000.
Not much of that left. But there's condos and apartments and
It honestly typically comes down to housing diversity. You have a lot of single family homes in Plaistow. You have some really nice homes in Plaistow. How many of you have ever lived in an apartment at any stage of your life? Or you might need to or want to move into something smaller at some stage of your life. What do your kids need, or what might they need? So it's having that different life stage housing too, to have more flexibility and resiliency. That's sort of part of it. A lot gets talked about with affordable housing. We're gonna have to talk about it. But don't let that dominate this housing conversation. Talk about the needs of your community, because the decisions you make in zoning, it's part of the equation. You can't do anything about the land use value, quite frankly. You're part of the problem. You're part of the solution. We need more housing in the area just to support the population we actually have. So I know I can't fully answer you that nothing will happen. It could. The legislature next year might change something, but let's at least make a good argument for why you have what you have.
Richard's house can be turned into an apartment.
Oh, yeah.
I feel the same way anyways with the kid.
All right, okay.
All right,
can
I'm
move
going
on.
to try and run through the
Yep.
rest of this because we have a
Sorry.
couple other things to talk about,
Okay.
but these are the housing need projection numbers. The total based on the projection, and I want to stress one other thing. There is no prescribed method in law as to how these projections were come up with. They were done with a method that has been utilized, but it's not prescribed in law. So there are arguments that this is not the right way to do it. Total number of units you need by 2025 is 172 more units. So that's in the next 3 years. That's probably not realistic for Plaistow. The number of affordable units of those 172, 76 need to be affordable, and 96 can be market rate. So they could be at any price point. By 2030, that's 317 units total, so that includes the 172. So by 2030, it's 317 total. 2035, it's 415. By 2040, it's 470 units. 208 should be affordable. 262 can be market rate. With all of those numbers, the split is about 30% rental, and owner occupied is about 68%. So there is that split. I know it sounds like a lot of housing units.
But if there's no land, you can't do it.
A lot of towns think that they are fully built out. I suspect when we do our build out analysis that's part of the housing grant, there's going to be some things that surprise you, and there are some very creative developers out there. So you might think you don't have a lot of land, but I guarantee you still have
But what
land.
if the developer doesn't want to do affordable housing?
That's fine. In all honesty, your regulations have to provide reasonable and realistic opportunities, but you can't force a developer to build affordable housing.
Right.
Most towns end up encouraging affordable housing through things like density bonuses. And there's other mechanisms, but that's a very common way. So a few Plaistow statistics for you. So your average age is not quite as old as the rest of the region, but you have gotten older. In 2010, you were 43.2 years old, and 2020, you were 44.2. So I'll let you decide on yourselves whether you fall on above or below those numbers. Your school enrollment has actually gone down by quite a bit. I don't know if that's because of a school district change. That's a particularly large number.
Well, not the school budget, but the school
Not the
enrollment.
budget, the population. Sorry, not the budget, the population.
Enrollment number, the school, the SAU office, because we recently changed to a different SAU, and
Oh, that probably.
Hampstead
Oh,
stayed in the
right,
SAU.
right, yep.
We started our own SAU. So
Oh, is that what it is, Jay? Is
That
that is that 50?
I don't know, but that seems like a
That's
really-
about the only place where you'd see a gap like that, right?
Yeah.
Because Sandown has built more homes, so
Right.
they've increased.
but that
But
seems
that
like
would
a
make sense
really
if because
high
you're taking the whole town out.
decrease.
That is true. I will say this is just from Department of Education for each individual town of the number of students, but
So that
Because
would be
of
it.
because of
That's
Hampstead
SAU change.
splitting,
Yeah.
yeah, that would make sense.
Probably it. Yeah.
Your median household income went from 76,000 in 2010 to 85,000 in 2020. So your income has gone up, but not a ton. And the number of folks in the sun identified as living below the poverty level is 267. It's a little higher than in 2010. Just of note, your households, like how are they compromised? Your percentage of folks that are in one-person households has actually increased. It went from 22% to about 29% so that's 2010 numbers to 2022. Your three-person households went from 18% to about 13%. And your four or more person households went from 22% down to 19%. So your number of people living in each home is slowly getting smaller. That's in part people are having less kids are moving out, spouses are dying, people are choosing to live alone for longer periods of time. There's lots of reasons, but less people per household means that there's a demand for more households.
Yeah, I can't wait for that day.
And then just a good snapshot. This is the home sale prices in Plaistow in the past year. So you have quite a few houses that are below that $450,000 level. You have some, and that accounts for like condos and townhouses. But you also have a good amount of your housing stock that is well above that. And we'll send these slides so that you guys have all these numbers and copies and can look at that. But
Got it right here.
oh, okay, that's right. So that is it for the regional housing needs assessment and the Plastow part of that.
The 265 to 527, that's RPC's region or Plastow?
That's the RPC region. We are going to do a deeper dive into Plastow's data to find out Plastow's number.
Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, it's double. It's just crazy.
I mean, that kind of, the other statistics we have is that cost of housing has increased by about 100%. So, all right. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Victoria to go through the housing opportunity grant that we worked with, and you guys worked with Sarah to secure back in February. So you guys have seen this scope, but this is sort of a refresher, understanding where we are in the process. You want to sit here, or do you want me to down? Okay.
These presentations are shorter now that you have a ton to think about. Here's some forward action. So you probably already know a lot about the HOP grants. Just a quick review. So right now we're participating in task 1. It's going to be the master plan housing chapter update. And we will also need to do some more committee meetings in regards to that. Another thing that we've just started, or we're starting to think about, is the build-out analysis. So we're going to be working on that all throughout to winter 2024. So the deliverables on that is going to be the build-out analysis that Jen mentioned and some GIS files. That'll be really important for future use. And task 3, that's going to be, task 3 and 4 are going to be big ones as well. Community engagement is super important. I already started working on the housing preference survey. So that's going to be released between summer and fall. We have to be very considerate of where people are in the summer. We want to reach as many people as possible. And we understand that people are very busy. Any sort of advice that you can provide on that, on how to reach the, community members of Plastow is always appreciated.
So just to get into that a little bit, so RPC through the grant money is going to put together that survey.
Yep.
Will you engage us with the questions before that goes out?
Yep.
And the kind of cool thing is we have a little bit of a roadmap. Was it as successful as we wanted? Probably about as successful as we thought it could be on how to get the survey to the community, which was through the economic development survey. I don't know that we would do anything different or that we could, but if anybody has any ideas, we can consider it.
Yeah.
We had decent feedback for, what do we have, about 400 responses?
Yeah, I will say we can use that list because there was a sign up at the end of that survey of people who wanted additional information. We're going to reach out to them again for this survey as well, in addition to all of the methods you guys used for that.
Whether or not people care to do it, we'll see. But is there more interest in this than economic development? Maybe. I mean, I would think so.
So there'll be a draft for the next working session. If we have time to go over it, I would absolutely love to. This one is going to be, in my opinion, a little bit more interesting because it's a visual preference survey. So we're going to have pictures and we're going to ask how you feel about it. So not too deep thinking. It won't take horribly long. Not very personal.
What's the target audience, the population of this survey would be? Because I'm thinking along the lines of, let's say, you're eliciting, who are you getting the information from?
Hopefully everyone.
So typically when we do these surveys, we cast a net to the Plastow community. Residents, business owners.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of, let's say, real estate professionals or people that are in that business. I mean, they have a pretty, I guess for lack of a better word, and they have a sense of a pulse on what the business and what what's out there and what people are looking for and what they can't get and things like that.
So it's good to reach out to realtors as well, and there are ways of targeting certain questions if we really need that. The idea of a visual preference survey, though, is to give people ideas of if you were to tweak your zoning or promote more things, what would that look like? Most folks have a hard time understanding, like, what's a duplex, what's a multifamily development, what's a setback that's only 10 feet versus 40 feet. A visual preference survey is showing them photos of what it might look like, and they can react to that better than they can descriptions of a 40-foot setback versus 100 feet or 2-acre lots. Most people have a hard time understanding what that will look and feel like in their community. That's why using a visual preference survey is a lot easier for your typical folks, but those specific targeted outreach is really able to be done under task 4. So it's a couple of layers of outreach.
I assume we'll have the caveat, would this be okay with you if it was next door to your house? Because most people are like, yeah, build the duplexes, but just that side of town, not in my backyard, right? So
Yeah, so it'll show the picture and say, yes, I like it. No, I don't like it. I would only like this in certain parts of Plaistow, and have an open section. And Richard, to your point, it's going to be a little open too. It's not just for residents. So we have a question: Do you own a business, or do you work in Plaistow, or do you live in Plaistow? So
right.
We're hoping to reach a lot of people of varied backgrounds, because we're not just planning for housing for a certain population. We're gonna need to find your kid a place to live.
sure.
And me. Task 4, community engagement, public information session and workshop. That will be, we imagine 2 community engagement events, public info and workshop. It is good to allow people to be on the same page before you expect them to participate effectively.
I have a question on task 2, the build out analysis. Is that just residential or is it commercial and industrial as well?
So we're going to do a baseline build out, which is like under your current zoning. How could you see more developments? And it'll really be lots. So how many more lots could you get? And how it's zoned could depend on if it's residential or commercial. Then we can do different scenarios, like if you were to only allow commercial in one zone and let residential be everywhere else, how would that sort of trickle out based on the current zoning requirements? So those scenarios, the base we'll just do because it's existing information. The scenarios specifically where we need the residents and the planning board's input as to what are the best scenarios to try to map out.
So then task 5, master plan housing chapter, that'll be the final draft and adoption. I will, of course, share the progress along every way, and you'll be able to read it a couple of times and give opinion. Summer 2023 to winter 2024, another long haul land use regulation audit, ranked recommendations in order to reach housing goals. Just like we mentioned before, kind of playing with those scenarios, seeing how, if there are any potential changes, what could they be? And facilitate public input opportunities, 2 public input events, and a public input summary, including prioritized key actions. That's really important for the people that hopefully say that they want more information and to follow along with the process. And then task 8 is going to be phase 2 of the HOP grant application submission. In order to move ahead with any regulatory changes, it's hard to say what that would look like right now without going through the full process. So like I said, we're in task 1, master plan, housing chapter background review and committee meetings. So the RPC is in charge of, updating data from the census and from the regional housing needs assessment. And you all will have to decide what the master plan committee is going to look like. Is it going to be the committee as a whole, or are we going to have a few of you meet at a different time and dates? And I will also need you all to review drafts and provide your input. So together, we're going to develop and review background information, establish goals and actions, and definitely strategize community engagement.
Tim, have we had a master plan committee, or if we in the past, or if we typically just worked it through as something through a workshop meeting?
Yeah, I think we've tried that a couple times, and the only people that really signed up for it were planning board members. So we said, why meet twice a week when we just use our workshop if we're the only ones that are going to work on it? So, I mean, I think it's always good if you can get other people besides us to be on a committee. But it's, as everybody knows, it's hard to get volunteers, but
And it could just be planning board members outside of regular planning board meetings if some of you were more gung-ho about it than others.
yeah, could be. I think the other thing, if we're looking for more participation, is to realize this is only going to be maybe a 2 or 3 month commitment at most. So it's not like you're signing up for 3 years of weekly or monthly meetings. No, hopefully not.
I think that the most work that the planning board will need to do is reviewing drafts and helping to strategize community engagement and participate in that. And then you have to decide, is everyone going to the community engagement events? What is that going to look like? So that's when a subcommittee is useful. But
I think we can figure out what we think would work best, especially with 2 members out tonight. We can get full input at a later date.
Say we volunteer Lori for lion's share.
Lori and Karen. And Karen, they said, hey, I won't be there, but I want to be in the subcommittee.
The way I described
and the economic development subcommittee.
So we just told you all the things that you need to do. We gave you this big long list, but I'll make your night a little bit better and tell you all the things that I've done so far. I did start. I updated the data on the old chapter, I made a new chapter. I put in data from the New Hampshire statewide housing needs assessment and RPCs. Added some language about the workforce housing law and analyzed some key considerations and implications for housing, like water and sewer, land conservation, transportation, energy and broadband, historic properties. Also put together a local regulatory opportunities list. So work has been done. So that's good. So there'll be something for you to read relatively soon.
Okay.
So get ready for that.
Love that.
Next steps, got to determine what you want to do in regards to the master plan committee. If you want one, start thinking about public engagement. What would be some, good engagement questions? We're definitely going to be there for that, but you guys are community members. You've done community engagement in Plaistow before, I hope. So you might have some insight that we don't on Plaistow specifically, where to have it, where to put out flyers, any community resources that we might not know about, community groups.
We've talked about that type of stuff in various capacities. I think we could sort of accumulate all that back together. But typically it does involve this room, right, for community engagement, some capacity. Will there be a lot of people here? Probably not, but it'd be nice, right? Tim, what was the last successful community engagement endeavor that planning board has accomplished?
was a master plan update. It wasn't a subcommittee, but it was a public information session. And I think we had, geez, I don't remember exactly, 30 or 40 people. We held it at the library.
Okay.
And I think we held 2 sessions, one in the afternoon for people that don't like to come out at night or can't come out at night for one reason or another, and then a second one in the early evening for people that worked. And we got, I think, about maybe equal amount, equal number of people at each one. That was when Steve Whitman was doing the master plan update, so it probably would have been 16 or 17, 2016, 2017. And I don't, before that I don't remember. I know we've had them occasionally, but
One thing we can also set up as an option is either an all online or a hybrid type of public engagement session, which is probably a little more feasible now than it was when you did your master plan update.
Yep.
Just as a consideration. And any other big community events that Plaistow may have, sort of in that late summer, fall, winter, where people are already gathering, we can do a little bit of engagement on. We can't do a full session if it's a different event, but where would you like to see more housing or not see housing on a map? People are usually willing to put a dot on a map. So.
And I'm professionally partial to using libraries for community engagement. It's a little bit more family friendly. Usually people know where they are. Plenty of parking. They're accessible.
yeah, there is the parking is better. Accessibility
There's no
is
stairs either. If that helps.
yeah, it has no stairs, and it allows for a larger number of people.
Yeah, they got a couple rooms there, right, that can accommodate.
This is kind of intimidating.
Well, when we have a public session, we move the tables back, so it doesn't feel like you're giving testimony in the court or something.
Get my gavel.
But because this building is used so often, tough sometimes to make all those physical arrangements.
All right. So when we approach that, sounds like we've got some history that we can use on our side and get through that. Okay, great.
As much as you can. Another important piece that I'll need your help on is putting together a housing vision. Like Jen was saying before, there was a total vision for your last master plan. It didn't really mention housing. But I did pull out a couple of things. I put them in bold, like maintaining these existing character and protecting and enhancing the town's character. So it's kind of something I want to focus on in public engagement. What do people mean by that? Is that just single family, or is that a certain look of housing? Is that a community feel? What does that mean?
Do you looking for feedback right now, or?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Just think about it. And visual preference survey. If you have any pictures of houses that you want to share with me so that people can upvote or downvote your house. We definitely are looking for a range of different types of housing. There's a couple single family on there, a couple duplexes, some condos, just like I've shown here.
And it doesn't just have to be from Plaistow. It's actually almost better if it's not Plaistow, because people might not want to see their own home, and people saying they don't like it.
That's awesome. Choose all of our homes and then see. Yeah, they hated yours. No, I know. We like Westville, the apartments there, the Barker Street sort of duplexes or whatever those are, all the way through some of the neighborhoods with ranch style homes to some of the newer ones with larger cookie cutter type colonials, I guess.
Or if you have any adjacent communities that have done some multifamily builds and you don't have any pictures of it, you can send me your ideas and I can go over and take some
Okay.
pictures.
The one thing I'm curious about is you'd mentioned, Jen, about pinning on a map. And I feel like I know the town relatively well, mostly working through the board, but sometimes I'm like, where's that again? And like, so when we did the last survey, it asked for some pinning and I was on my phone. So I was just like, I couldn't figure it out on my phone. So I kind of just skipped that. So I don't know if that comes into play with.
Yeah, usually the mapping questions that we do, I have one going to kind of Thrive for housing preference. About 50% of people are not able to do it. Either they're using a cell phone and it's kind of annoying, or they're just not used to using that type of function on the internet. But you can get some really rich results, and we can keep using that kind of question and additional public engagement. So you're sort of building where because people are very place oriented. They know where they like things and where they probably don't want things because they know what neighborhood they live in. So yeah, I might not want duplexes in my backyard, but I'm okay with it if it's near the other duplexes.
Yeah.
I think we had pretty good success with the survey we just did.
Yeah, you did get really good results. The mapping question itself probably got the least number of responses, which is why it was down in the survey.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the first question.
And I was wondering if you have kind of unofficial neighborhoods and their kind of extents. I feel like every community does, but if you don't live there and if you haven't lived there for over 15 years, you don't know where the neighborhoods are. So maybe adding a question saying more housing, less housing for specific neighborhood groups, if that would be an option.
Do we have district, like, I don't know.
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
We kind of have,
I mean, the later, well, some of the larger subdivisions have names like, now I can't think of any. Village Way just down the street here, Stonebridge, is it? Off of Old County. Then, I think everyone knows maybe Twin Ridge condos. So there's a few, but they're not neighborhoods in the sense of here's a group of houses that kind of or families that relate together as a neighborhood.
west side or east side, or we don't have like geographic sort of unofficial names for areas per se.
Another way to sort of think about it, if you were to take your kids or grandkids trick-or-treating and you only wanted to go to one place,
I know where that is.
where would you go? It's those places that are sort of the
Bill gives out the big candy bars.
That's my neighborhood.
Yeah.
We're like a couple hundred kids.
Yeah. Because you're right. Because they nice non-major road neighborhood.
Yeah, but you can walk in. There's a lot of homes.
A lot of
in there.
homes. Yeah. I get it. All right. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there, but makes sense.
That's it for the hot piece of this. Do you have any questions thus far? I need you to decide with the committee and start thinking about some public engagement ideas that you might have.
The only we've got a lot actually between trying to pave the pathway to get the economic development plan into actionable items, HOP grant, how do we stay engaged and move that forward, as well as a regional housing needs assessment. So the only thing I can think of is we might need to sort of map this on a calendar in some sort, right? This is what we hope to achieve on these dates. Otherwise, I'm not sure we can get it all done because it's going to come up on us quickly, especially if we're not doing a July workshop. However, I think we can take some opportunities within the application hearings to sneak some of the stuff in, and all dependent upon the volume of applications that come in. So If we only have one application, we know it's gonna be a half hour type of deal. Well, let's get one or two of these things done. So
Yeah,
I
do you
don't
want
know.
me to take a shot at it? And
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
at the next planning board meeting, not the next work session, but like the next actual meeting.
yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the priorities are and how do we align those with possible dates at least,
Yeah.
so that we stay on target and not get bunched up and just implode.
Absolutely love that idea, and I would be happy to take it on.
And also not have 3 to 4 hour meetings each time. So I hear about these mythical come in and then, all right, we're good, and everybody leaves meetings. I don't think they ever really happen.
You guys have some work for the next couple of months, but I think it's really good work that you're going to be doing.
I agree.
Right, and speaking of another thing that you have to do, I have a stormwater.
Is this like the MS4 type stuff? That was a good presentation you did previously. I assume this is additional information and
Additional and shorter.
okay. All right. And then the goal here is to come zoning amendment time, we need to implement some updates and whatnot. Who's taking the lead on that? Because I'm not going to be helpful there.
Yeah. So there are 7 core elements to this. You guys have a lot of them. We do need to think about responsibility for review,
Okay.
responsibility and frequency, procedures for inspection and maintenance. And we also have to discuss applicability and threshold. You asked before for some ideas on what other communities do, and I do have a table on the next slide. But currently, it's 20,000 square feet. Construction or reconstruction of a street or road, a subdivision of 2 or more building lots or planned residential subdivision lot, proposed work adjacent to a wetlands buffer or disturbed critical areas, which is pretty much all on point in my opinion. So just some examples from other communities. Kingston right next door, 15,000. Newton, 15. Nothing. A little smaller, 5,000 square feet. Some of the communities, like Raymond, it's 10,000 square feet, but then it is 2,500 within 100 feet of a surface water body. And then for more than 10,000 square feet of disturbed area, there may be an exception if the total site impervious cover created does not exceed 5,000 square feet. And there are some other requirements that go with that too.
Ours is currently 20.
Ours is currently 20.
Is it does the uniqueness of our community versus some of those other ones? Because I see everybody seems to be, besides Hampstead, everybody's lower. Would it be a recommendation to have ours a smaller?
So some of these communities do have different water concerns.
Yeah.
Also has them as well. Hampstead and Plaistow are at 20,000 right now. If you wanted to go down, that is completely viable. My professional opinion, if you wanted to keep it at 20, make sure that there's a threshold for development near surface water bodies. So you might not be catching as many projects, but you could be catching the more important ones.
Even though we don't really have water sources, and what are we, one of the few towns and that doesn't have actual water source, but we do have bodies of water,
There's
so
some
to speak,
small
right?
ones.
Like, yeah.
Going smaller is that you probably get more smaller projects that add up quickly. That's the reason more towns go smaller. But you also don't want to be so punitive that someone just putting in an extra parking spot triggers it. So it's finding that balance,
Did you use the 1,000 cuts metaphor?
basically.
Did you say that to me?
The what?
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah. So smaller projects, a little bit more administrative work.
Tim, what's your thought on that coming from Concom and stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. I have to think about it.
Okay.
There's a lot of things that come into play there. And the more, if you do a smaller amount and have other restrictions that come into play, it's more complicated for people to work through it. More complicated for our engineer to review it and make sure it complies. So, and it would, probably one of the things we can do is get recommendations from the town review engineer, Steve Keach.
I'm sorry, from who?
Pardon?
You said you want to get recommendations from who?
Steve
From
Keach.
Steve Keach is our
Keach. He's our
town engineer. Also a planning board review engineer. So we've gotten good input from him before.
So if we say that, do you guys approach Dee and say, Dee, the board mentioned this at the meeting, and does she send it off to Steve, or are we holding tight?
That's certainly something that you should have the town engineer review when you get to a certain point. I would work through a few of these other things
got
before you bother. But I've worked with Steve on 4 of those, so he's really familiar with reviewing these regulations.
Yeah.
I imagined it going a little bit more like the board is between these two numbers. Mr. Keach, what is your opinion? And that's one of the topics in the memo, as well as the other things we have to decide on, which is responsibility. So currently, the town engineer reviews plan sets that are submitted, and then once it is active construction, they set up an inspection schedule. Some could be the town engineer or the building inspector. And then once new development is built, someone has to ensure that it's functioning properly. Right now, as I know, you might have something internally that really could be anyone. I think it depends on the project. And moving forward, we do recommend that an inspection happen within the first year the building is completed. And then you really shouldn't go any more than 3 years between inspections after that first year's inspection. I put Raymond down as an example. They have a report due every 2 years. But they do also have a report due within the first 2 years of the occupancy permit.
Whereas we have a yearly one? Is that sufficient?
Yearly?
Sounds like it is, right?
Yeah. We just don't recommend you go longer than 3. A year is fine. You just have to figure out who is filling out this log. Who is it going to? Who's reviewing it? So creation, acceptance, review every year.
If this is our current state, do we have someone doing it right now?
So with any conditions of approval of any plans that you approve, if stormwater maintenance and an inspection requirement was part of it, it's probably D that is ensuring that condition of approval is being met, or the administrative aspect, not necessarily going out and inspecting the stormwater infrastructure, but that they are certifying that it is functioning.
I think we require a stormwater management plan that gets approved. But I'm pretty sure we're very lax on after the plan is approved, 2 years down the road, is that infrastructure working correctly? In the management plan, we may require that the owner submit a report stating it's been inspected and blah, blah, blah. We don't do that very well. We just put it that way.
Yeah, who's to say that they actually did that?
Well, and then, it's not, it's easy for us to say that, but if you're a small business owner or homeowners association that had stormwater infrastructure in your subdivision, you pay someone to inspect it, and then they find something wrong. Now, is the owner have to redo that? You can't. Sometimes it'd be next to impossible to get back to the developer if it was not done right, or so there's some implications there about post approval inspections.
Also, in any good infrastructure, though, if it's not being maintained and it's failing, there's almost no purpose in having it in the first place, which is why that's a really important catch in the whole thing. If you're not doing that, then
Yeah, I agree. Mm.
So, if these are conditions that we're putting on the planning document, are we saying that there isn't, I don't know, some giant calendar somewhere where somebody's saying that we're either checking that to make sure that these things are done, or like, for instance, like a monitoring well type arrangement.
Yep.
You have a well that's supposed to be monitored, and it's supposed to be tested periodically for duration of time, and then maybe that duration drops off over a period of time. And so currently we don't have something. It's just that they're supposed to be doing it, but we don't necessarily verify that it's being done, or not doing it very well.
Yeah, unless this is. A lot of times you find out things don't work because the neighbor's yard gets flooded, or something happens. But yeah.
what's really common for a lot of towns is they'll have a specific date that all of the reports are due, September 1st. So anybody that's gotten an approval for a plan that has a stormwater management plan, every year on the same date, they have to have submitted a report, or landowners does it, or they have an engineer do it for them, to the town that says, we verify the stormwater infrastructure is functioning as designed. Or they say it's not functioning and this is how we're going to fix it. Some towns will send out a reminder letter to those property owners, because it's whoever owns the land is responsible for that. Some towns will send out that letter in June as a reminder, because it's usually not a very long list. Some towns don't. They just say you're responsible for it, which is true.
So these towns are maintaining that list.
Yes.
So there's an active working list that somebody's either saying that we're sending the list out to these people, and then you have that sort of back and forth that's happening.
Some towns do that. A great many do not. I suspect Plastow does more than you think happens, but probably not quite enough. It is an administrative burden, but it doesn't have to be super complicated, but it is an administrative task to verify.
Well, I'm just curious to know that if there's an actual task that exists that's being done, or if it's just merely reactive.
I think we could follow up with Dee. I think she would know. I know that I've seen it on a yearly basis, the MS4 reporting that is done. So I know we are doing it. I don't know how thorough it is.
You do the MS4 reporting.
But
it's a little different.
Yeah, it's a little different. But I know we've been fined in the past years ago, and we've been very diligent about keeping up with that. So I don't know, as far as what you were saying, the letters going out, we'd have to confirm that. But
for that takeaway, and I apologize that I just missed part of that. Is there any little action that's going to take place, or that I need to request, or is someone going to request something?
It's honestly probably just a conversation to find out a little more about what is happening currently to make a recommendation as needed for.
You having that?
I can certainly follow up with Dee.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and see
Love
what's
that.
going on.
And we created 2 more committees that you're going to be the chair of.
Lauren and Lori and Karen. I can delegate.
But it seems like at least you are good with yearly.
Well, whatever the board comes up with, again, the question is it being done, or is it? I mean, if it's overly burdensome, then maybe it doesn't need to be yearly. But I'd like to know. It'd be nice to know that there is a follow up and that it gets implemented and done. However, we see fit. So
Yeah, Dee would know better than anyone, right?
okay,
You know, doing it yearly might be easier than compiling everything and doing it in 2 years.
true. Well, and then does code enforcement go out and do a visual inspection, or do we rely upon the occupant to provide that data? I don't know.
That's part of your decision making of like who is verifying that things are working. Is
Sure.
it the landowner with an engineer? Is it your town engineer? Is it your building inspector? Yeah, it can run the gamut of who is going out and doing the inspections.
What's typical?
Most municipalities like to have it either be landowner reported or landowner reported, but they have to have a professional engineer stamp the report.
And with the engineer stamp, that takes some of the administrative burden off in terms of the review.
So no, I'm good. We did it. Yep. It's a quick email, right? So it sounds like that second option is probably the most effective. Yep.
Based on our conversation at the last working session, it seems like everyone was comfortable with the current process of intaking reports. So you have your engineer review and the applicant pays for it.
That's true.
Makes sense to me, just like that.
Agree.
So I'm just gonna follow up with Dean and see what happens with the yearly swim reports. Get her opinion on that process and if it needs to be altered or strengthened in any way, or if yearly is too much. You will sit on the idea of a committee, or you want to stick together?
Did I miss up a stormwater committee, or the?
I'm whole listing it right now. No stormwater committee.
There's a lot of
I'm at the
committees.
end. This is the end.
What committee are we doing?
Okay, so for stormwater, I'm going to talk to Dee. And then once we have all of our opinions written down, we're going to reach out to Steve Keach.
Yeah.
So that he can agree on everything that we've decided on. And that's for stormwater.
Oh, and then master plan committee is what you were talking about.
And then for the housing work, you guys are going to think about the committee?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one, dude. I think either we get we can hopefully accomplish the next meeting. Karen's hoping she's going to be feeling better in time for the next meeting, so we can have a consensus about what we think would be best. I don't know, for the members that are here, do you think we should just incorporate it into our regular workflow, or should we try to get an offshoot committee, which may or may not include non-members, but likely may not? And what do you guys think?
Or a decision could be made after I put together that calendar. See what the actual timeline and availability looks like.
Do you think it's a lot of work for that piece, master plan committee, or that master plan piece?
It's hard to say. I think that it highly depends on how much interaction we get with the survey and at the meetings. The review part of it won't be horrid.
I know for myself, I'd rather have it in the work session if we could. I have enough other meetings.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure that I could put myself out for another day or, but
You
if
know,
it's,
if you plan on it, you're going to talk about it, you're almost like, okay, we might be a little bit later that night.
yeah.
This is an option if you get to a point where like the draft chapter has been done, but you're still talking about like goals and stuff that are in the. You could have a one-off meeting.
True. All right. Yeah, I don't think we need to come up with a final determination this evening, but
We just talk about it quick the next meeting. That's what, 2 weeks, right?
yep.
That's it for my presentations. Not too bad, right?
Nope. Nope. It was good. Good info. Good info. All right. So. All right. On the agenda is planning board rules of procedure. I didn't present anything different on that, so we're not nothing necessarily to get on this evening about for that piece. And then we just talk about stormwater. I think we've all agreed that July 5th is a typical no-go.
Yep.
It's our next meeting day after the 4th of July. But like I said, if we have some available time, what we'll do is I'll review any of the applications that we have coming forth, try to determine if they are going to book up for a couple hours worth of discussion. If not, then we can take advantage of some of the extra time at our non-workshop meetings to do workshop stuff. There was a late email that came over, and I haven't read it in full. I don't know if there's a document here about it. Oh, here it is.
The memorandum.
If we can talk about that for 2 seconds. Apparently, a company is potentially interested in putting an MRI, CT scan place into next to it's the retail space. Apparently, it's next to the Bed Bath & Beyond.
There's a small little spot there with the door.
Yeah. And so it gives some details. The email gives some details. I don't know. Is there anybody that hasn't seen it? If you haven't, then take a quick look while we're looking at it. So the plaza is approved for retail. This would require it to be a change of use. So the question is, would we require amended site plan or not? So it's a proposed change of use that's already approved in the district, but not necessarily for that property. My thought was a couple things. I don't know when the last time we've seen a site plan for this plaza. A couple 20 years ago, 30. I don't know how long has this plaza been around.
It's been there for a while, but I mean, there's no site changes required. I mean, it's putting a building, a small building in a site plan that's already been approved for building there. Bed Bath & Beyond didn't use the whole space, so there was vacant space left, which these people are proposing. So I think I agree with Dee on this. I don't see that they need to come before the planning board with another site plan. It's a small company, and how much to do a site plan, I have no idea, but it's a lot of money. It's a big site.
Yeah.
And I don't, for what purpose? I don't know.
No, it's a good question. We did put an amendment forth this past March that sort of strengthened when a site plan was required and when it wasn't. So I don't know if that to sort of be a little bit more lenient about when a site plan is required goes kind of against that.
Well, I mean, if it was a use that required a larger share of the parking lot, then there would be something to review.
Because I mean, there's going to be no walk-in services. there's only gonna be 2 patient rooms. For the parking area there, and there's a ton of it there anyways, what's the most you're gonna see, maybe 4 vehicles?
Um, the medical use will require CT, which is radiation. So I don't know if there's any concern there.
Is there a sense? I mean, if they're not going to do a formal, site plan or anything like that, or change of use, or having them come in and just sort of informally talk about it generically, or
This is I'm gonna
no?
at some point I'm gonna bump it to you guys and get your professional opinions. You guys, you girls, you ladies. But what's your thoughts?
Dee made some wonderful points. Some things you should also maybe think about is, are these walk-ins or are they getting transported in via chair car? Is there going to be a greater demand for handicap spots? Wouldn't be a requirement, but a good recommendation. Are there going to be any sort of hazardous materials? Is everyone of good health coming in? What are we disposing? Are there any requirements for CT and MRI that I wasn't able to find today? Those were my initial thoughts, but again, it is a less intensive use. It is, in some opinions, a great community asset. It might be considered going against the economic development survey, looking for different types of businesses.
It's a small little space right there.
Yeah.
I think it'd be, I think the community would find it beneficial, right? These are the types of things that right now you can't go to community MD. They don't have this service. Some they do, but last time we needed
It
an
would
X-ray
save you
to go to
from going to
Londonderry.
the hospital. To
Very,
get something
very
done.
expensive. Yeah.
You just go there quick for an MRI and you're out the door by appointment only.
There is again, MRIs, big magnet, CTs, radiation. So I don't know. Is there anything that we need to consider there? I think
that's the biggest question.
There's a cooling unit. I'd like to kind of understand what that is. And
So I will still need an occupancy permit that requires a life safety walkthrough by your building official and your fire staff.
does it hurt to have a site plan? I don't think it does. What do you have in your experience? Like, what do you think?
Your change of use definition is a little bit different than a lot of towns. Based on that definition, I agree with Dee's assessment. I mean, Victoria's points are really on spot. Most towns, the definition of a change of use is any expansion or change from one permitted use to another permitted use. And that's where it begins and ends. It doesn't talk about less intense. It's just one change from one use to another, and often doesn't require more parking. Your process is a little bit different.
But if it states that, do those towns state that they require a site plan or not?
Most towns would only require a change of use. It would not trigger a full amended site plan.
Whereas
it would
ours
require a planning board approval, but it's not amending the site plan.
So can we require planning board approval without an amended site plan?
Well, what we have here, if you read the change of use would be effectuated, memorialized with a note to the file and a drawing, like especially locating the chiller enclosure. And the board would still review and sign off on it.
So,
It's on the back.
oh, sorry, I missed that. See, I didn't see that.
It's on the back.
The change of use could be effectuated and memorialized with a note to the file and drawing locating the chilling.
Most towns would not require an amended site plan for this kind of change.
Could we require them to come before the board, present their use, and make some notations to the current to the current site plan.
If you're making them change the site plan, that's an amended site plan.
So right now, if we say we don't need an amended site plan, then it won't come in front of the board at all.
It can still have to come before the board for you.
Did you read the paragraph below the one that you just read?
This is really asking, do you want an amended site plan?
Right.
Right.
Not that you would.
That's how I look at it, and my opinion, I don't think we really need it.
If they come in front of the board and we have some concerns, can we then require an amended site plan?
You can always trigger a higher level of review if you needed to.
Does that sound reasonable to the board? Sorry, sitting too casually, but
I think so. I think that's reasonable, you know.
Tim, you've probably come across stuff like this in the past, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, yeah, I don't think we've had people come in about a change of use that didn't also require some change to the site, so there was a amended site plan required. This one, I mean, other cases where there's been one change of use from one permitted use to another permitted use, they haven't come to the planning board. The building inspector for any new development always does make sure the parking is adequate, and the septic is adequate. If those two criteria are met, and it's change of use from one permitted use to another permitted use, and that's kind of the end of the story. We don't ask them to come in. So, I think this falls into that category. I don't really see them.
so what Tim's kind of saying is they won't even have to come in front of us. But there is enough questions here where it sounds like they will have to come in front of us, but may not have to file an amended site plan. Through our conversation with them, we could determine that an amended site plan is required, or we could just simply state, sounds good, and make some notes on the current site plan. Is that what this is?
I mean, then a decision would be made.
A decision
If
would be-
you voted that they didn't need an amended site, you would make a decision that would be recorded,
Okay.
put with the file, so it would be memorialized. It just wouldn't necessarily be a new site plan. There would be record of it.
Yeah. It sounds like there's a couple questions, right, that the board would like to ask. So from my standpoint, I wouldn't mind having a conversation with them. And if we determine it doesn't require an amended site plan, then I think that's the best course of action. But if we get hung up on something, we may say, well, triggers. But if the board feels differently, I don't know if we don't have to do an official vote, right? We can just do a straw poll vote at this point, or do we have to? Yeah.
This is really, do we want an amended site plan more than anything is what she's asking, right?
I don't think it's do you want an amendment, it's what do you feel that them coming before you to talk about the change of use is warranted? Or do you?
I'll put it for the voting members here tonight and see what your thought. I honestly go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, I don't think we need to have them come in for the change of use. I agree with what Tim was saying. That's
I
my
agree with
thoughts.
him too.
I'd like to hear from them just because I'd like to understand a few things, especially about those aspects. But so I wouldn't at least mind having a conversation with them.
And it'd be in essence the same type of conversation that was had with staff, right? You know, just sort of we would be hearing that conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
Right, so.
you would have certainly asked them about, number of people, the parking, like what the details you scoped out. You may have a few more questions, but I think the basics have certainly been covered.
Tim, you feel that they don't need to come in front of the board?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Did you feel that it would be good or not necessary?
I don't think it's necessary. I mean, it's not,
I don't think it's
Oh,
necessary.
sorry, I was asking
Awful.
Richard.
Yeah, I don't
I'm
think
sorry.
it's necessary in the sense that, they must come before the board, but is it, if there was a conversation, the same level of consideration that was given where staff spoke to them, if they were to say it to the board, I'd consider it the same thing. So I don't think it's,
Do we know the name of the company? Are we able to get that information?
All that we received. This is memo.
It does say they do have 2 other locations. I don't know what the name of it is in
Yeah,
Manchester.
I mean, there's like Shields is a big one, but they have a lot of locations. I guess the question is, are they profit or not for profit? I don't know if that matters in our decision making. Obviously, if they're not for profit, right? There's a tax. Impact.
I guess why wouldn't you have them just sort of come and say this in front of us? I mean, is there a compelling reason why they wouldn't?
If they say no, it's not entirely enforceable since a site plan is not necessarily required in this instance. So you could say, hey, could you please come and explain to the board exactly what you're doing? And if they say no, I think they're allowed to.
Well, I'm not Vladimir Putin, so you say
Unnecessary.
Unnecessary.
says unnecessary. Well, Putin loses out tonight. So, all right. Well, then I will go with the will of the board, or the majority of the board, and say that our response is to align with what Tim mentioned, what Dee has on here.
No site plan required, but if you see the note and the drawing of the chiller, you can change your mind.
Yeah, I think we'd like to understand a few questions, and I don't know if we can accommodate that, by Dee getting a few questions out there, right?
We don't get to know the name of the company at all. I mean,
If
Is that a
if they
closely
formally
guarded-
applied,
Okay.
then you would get to know the name of the company. It doesn't sound like that formal.
Yeah. Okay. And part of their willingness to come here may be whether or not they need to get a site plan. If they want to incur that cost or not, who knows?
If you have other questions, just from what information you know, that could at least be relayed to them as
Okay.
part of this. So where's the chiller? Are there any maybe additional handicap spaces that they would anticipate for their clientele?
Do they have, is there any special requirements for the chiller? Is there any special requirements for any hazardous materials? Assumption that the CT scan is going to be, irradiating the area. Of course, they know how to construct, but they didn't previously construct the facility with all radiation. So, what's their plan to mitigate that kind of stuff? And with that in mind, they'd need to get approval through. Who would they get approval through on that, Tim?
building inspector,
Building inspector.
health inspector, I guess, possibly.
And will those all get triggered regardless of whether there's an amended site plan or not?
Yeah, I mean that's an occupancy permit.
Okay.
And any modifications they must make.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
Why would it? Okay, I mean, just a question. I mean, if it's something that's completely not required, and we're not going to have the that information of what is the company and such. Why is it even being brought to us then? I guess is that a valid question? If it's not necessary, but then it's kind of cryptic. I guess that's what I'm saying. This is cryptic, and if we have questions, we can pass the questions on, and then someone will ask them, and then we'll get answers. It seems, well, if it's not necessary for us to deliberate on it, well, why are we deliberating on it?
I will say it is also possible that the tenant is not explicitly known. So sometimes you have a retail space be designed and you might not know the occupant yet.
Okay, there's a
But
there's a question: is the tenant explicitly known?
Well, to your point, on the one, like I said earlier, on the one hand, we strengthened our site plan requirements through, warrant article this year. But on the other hand, we're sort of saying, yeah, you have some flexibility with this. But it sounds like technically we do require an amended site plan, right? But we're trying to give some leniency to it.
Yeah, I will say in general, I think your review process for change of use site plan needs to be revamped because I think you have a lot of these situations.
I mean, this seems very, again, kind of anonymous, like it's like a closed bid of some kind. That we have a client that is coming and there are certain questions about it, but it's not necessary for you to talk to them. But if you want to have questions, we can pass it along to them. It's right, you want to come and talk to us or not? So, I mean, I guess that's kind of my position. It's like it's not necessary, but it's kind of necessary when we're talking about it. That seems kind of strange.
Yeah, we can say that the board has questions, and it would be greatly appreciated if they could come in. But they're not.
It seems
required to come in.
yeah. Well, it seems
we're
kind of.
asking
Then
for
why are we
something.
looking? Then why are we looking at this thing? Okay. I mean, it's like it's.
Because it sounds like technically we should ask for an amended site plan, right?
Definition.
Yeah, your definition though of change of use leads it to doesn't sound like it sounds like that the zoning official can make that determination of a less intense use. I think everybody's in consensus. The
Zoning official being
D in this case. I mean, it is a less intense use. It just is based on your requirements. It's a different use, but it's a less intense use based on.
And there'll be less
Water,
traffic.
sewer.
There'll be less traffic than if it was brick and mortar. I don't know. I just don't think it's for an amended site plan. I don't think you need it. Everything will be done pretty much inside with whatever they have outside that chiller. That's gonna be put on the site plan, right? That's gonna be added to it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we're stuck on what they're doing. We have a few questions just because it's in front of us, but I think to Richard's point, why are we even talking about it? There's some sort of deficiency in why we're even we either should be talking about it or not. It should be clear one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. I'm not debating whether or not it's necessary to trigger a site plan, but again, it's there's somebody here that we're not going to say who it is, and they don't want to do a site plan. And if you have questions, we'll pass the questions on through another layer of. I mean, it's you either come before the board or you don't. So I think that's if I'm going to be binary, I'm going to be binary like that. It's yes or no, and I would have to say that.
Well, perhaps this is the impetus to look at this section of our site plan language and determine if it needs some further clarification. Although we're lining up for like 30 amendments next year. It's not cool.
I mean, we could have them submit an as-built, which would show the location of the chiller. That might be.
That sound reasonable?
As-builts get pretty pricey for buildings of that size.
Yeah, but it'd be a lot less than the site plan.
Maybe not. I do have a site plan on file currently.
Right, but if they submit an amended site plan, then that warrants a full review, where the as-built would be, here's where the chiller is. The other complication is that's a condominium, so they would need permission from the owner of the condominium. And I don't. I think there's 3 separate units in the condominium. Walmart and maybe the Hallmark store is one. Home Depot and Bed and Bath Beyond, I think, or Staples are, I think, the second one, and then the third one is the little standalone bank that's in the corner. I think those are
separate owners.
Well, yeah, separate owners, yeah. But there's still that condo association, so,
Is there any possibility that the change of use for that retail location could impact the actual possible uses of the former Bed Bath and Beyond space? Right, I can't go in there because of that.
If the water use is less, the parking requirements are less than.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud. You know, again, we're irradiating, using radiation, and maybe the chiller's nuclear powered. I don't know.
I pulled up the change of use definition so you can see where the information is coming from. Pretty much where it says, such use shall be determined as permitted by the zoning officer. If the zoning officer determines that the proposed change of use is more intense or significantly different than the existing use, the proposed use shall require site plan approval.
Well, it's not going to be more intense in this traditional sense, foot traffic, and stuff. But is it significantly different? You could argue that.
There's nothing in there right now. Bed Bath and Beyond never used that space.
Is it significantly different than retail? It is, by definition.
I guess if you're a lawyer, you could argue that. Saying someone's going in, they're buying a service.
I mean, if we, I think as a courtesy, if we can get some questions answered, I think that would. I know it may not be required at this point, especially if we say no, we're good. We're going to allow at the discretion of the zoning officer, but we should probably tweak that, right?
I think there are several things with what level of review and when is it required that would make some things easier for you guys, applicants and for Dee. So.
Yeah, I think what Dee was really looking at, okay, if you look at the last sentence, I'd appreciate the board's input on the minor change. So she's really asking for our input, so she can better guide the requester. So that's why this was brought before us. It's, she just wanted additional input from us. Just probably make us aware of it, and if there's major concerns, to let her know.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think the board, unless the board's changing their mind, I think we've kind of spoken. We can ask as a courtesy to get some questions answered. I think that's reasonable. But we'll just move forward with a long evening.
So I have down, I'm going to ask Dee to pass this along to the business. We are wondering about special requirements for CT or MRI, if there'll be any additional handicap parking. I put down accessibility, hazardous waste removal, and a little bit more information on the chiller, and we want to know who it is. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's all I have. Because in essence, all those things aren't factors we'd ever ask for a retail use, traditional retail use. So in that essence, it's kind of unique. But if they can, I don't know, could we come back and still require an amended site plan at a later date, or is this it? So
I mean, you're not making an official decision.
Yeah.
Well, on the
providing input.
yeah, and on the enclosure for the chiller, we still going to review and sign off on that. It's right here.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. All right. That sounds good. Any other input?
Just in the comments to Dee, to make sure the condo documents are updated.
I'm sorry.
Make sure the condo documents are updated.
Anything else from the board? And we've determined that July 5th we're not meeting, and then communications updates, FYIs. Did Dee give any update on applications for the next meeting that are recorded right now? Okay, so one application that we know of.
Excuse me.
Address of the it was 2 meetings ago, and they withdrew.
Oh, yeah, 27 Garden Road.
So that's coming back?
It looks like there might be 2 on here if you look at the legal notice that was in the
Oh,
packet.
yeah, my bad. Should have looked at that. Okay, so that's interesting because we initially asked for a site walk, which because of the withdrawal. So wouldn't we have to discuss whether or not we were going to reinforce a site walk?
Really?
Yeah, you can't do the sidewalk until you accept jurisdiction of the application.
But we were already going to do a site walk. We had already
Oh,
accepted
they-
the jurisdiction.
They withdrew.
It's a new
No,
application.
it's a new application, so everything starts over.
So, I mean, if it's a simpler application, we might decide we don't need a sidewalk.
I'm sorry, I talked to Dee about this just today, and she said that she thought that a sidewalk was in order. And
Okay.
it would require.
But because it's a new application and it's recorded as a new one, we would start from scratch as if we never even had the initial ones. And then we may determine a new site walk date is going to be requested. Okay. All right. So there's that. And then, and also another one from Lewis Builders.
Harriman Road.
Yeah. That one's been popping in and out, right? As we've had discussions on that parcel. Okay. So this might be a kind of a busy night, I'm going to guess. Not guessing we're going to have a whole lot of time to discuss otherwise, but all right. Anything else from the board?
I was not here on May 17th. I was at my son's. So you might want to update your minutes. I can't make a motion. I'm not a voting member. So.
Well, I thought you were joking because I was pretty sure you weren't there.
I got the meeting mixed up with the previous workshop meeting we had. So sorry.
But I am above the medium age in here, so sometimes my memory does fail me, even though I tried to slip that in that I wasn't.
Who's in my mind?
From a minutes standpoint, because we've accepted the minutes, what do we do on that?
Just make an amendment.
Do we do that now?
I'm going to make a motion to the minutes we accepted earlier that we just confirmed that Jay was not present.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Chuck seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay, beautiful. Thanks, Jay. All right, with that, meeting is adjourned. 9:04.